Thanks for that report, Mike.
Also on Capitol Hill, there's a new spirit abroad between Republicans and Democrats. It's the spirit of Rodney King. Why can't we just get along? Earlier this week, President Clinton invited congressional leaders to the White House to discuss issues like Medicare and balancing the budget. And just yesterday, House Speaker Newt Gingrich held a face-to-face talk with Democratic Minority Leader Dick Gephardt, something both men have not done in a year. Bipartisanship is alive and well in Washington, but is this what we really want? With us to discuss this question is Frederica Mathewes-Green, national political correspondent for World Magazine. Frederica, welcome back to the program.
Hi, good to see you. Hi, Brad.
All right.
Yeah.
What about it? Do you think the president is actually going to be a conciliatory president? Now that the effort to take back the Congress for the Democrats has failed, do you think we're going to see that, or are we going to be back to business as usual? And is this just a little dance?
I think it may be for maybe a short-term kind of dance that we'll be seeing for a while. He plays that role very well, I think, sort of this soft and gentle and let us reason together. And I think it may have been something of a surprise to see the extent to which the Republicans retained their hold, even gained a few places, and perhaps he thinks it's in best interest right now.
Who needs this more, the Republicans in Congress or President Clinton?
Oh, that's a tough one. I think probably Clinton does right now. You could see him moving rightward continuously all during the campaign, and perhaps he thought he could swing back to center or even left afterwards.
Is he setting us up for a second term of real legacy and trying to establish some real policy that he can go down in history with? Is that his goal?
I wonder if that's it. I wonder if he's a little bit sobered. If you remember, right after the election in '92, we saw a number of extremely left-wing sort of things occur. In fact, he chose that very first March for Life as the day that he promulgated, was it five very anti-life executive orders.
And Mexico City and
and then we immediately started hitting them all with a lot of gay rights stuff. We saw a lot of this happening right away, and then he had to back off. And we're not seeing that. It's a very different mood right now.
But what we are seeing is the president backtracking. After meeting with the Republican congressional leaders and saying, well, let's get a balanced budget amendment, the next day, his handlers over in the White House are papering that over, saying, oh, he didn't really mean that. It just sounded like that. It came out that way, but that's not the point. Isn't this a lot of smoke and mirrors?
Well, you know what isn't changing is sort of a message from the White House from the beginning that's been diffuse, disorganized. It's been one thing one day, another thing the next day, and you just always have a feeling of a low level of panic going on there all the time. That much is consistent, I think, that they're not sure what they want him to do, and so he does tend to bounce around.
And then, can any of this be trusted? I mean, if he were to make all kinds of promises and say, this is what we want, we're going to work together to solve Medicare, we're going to hear that, solve Social Security, let's talk more about welfare reform, all these wonderful ideas that I'm hearing. Is this all going to go completely in the reverse when a new cabinet comes in and they say, look, Mr. President, we're liberals, that's where we belong, let's stay back on that course?
Yeah, he's sort of on a long tether right now, isn't he? Because he doesn't have that cabinet holding him accountable. So that may well happen.
I prefer chain in the backyard, but go ahead, tether
with a spiked collar, right? But that's the whole question. It's been sort of startling to see the entire cabinet hit the road, just about the entire cabinet immediately. And I wonder who he's going to find to replace them.
Well, of course, they've been talking about George Mitchell, and he would be a strong figure, perhaps in a way that Ron Brown was a strong figure during his lifetime. Most of the other cabinet members have not really been that dominant a character in the administration. It's been White House personnel. It's been Harold Ickes, he's leaving. It's been Mrs. Clinton, she's staying.
4 more years at least.
But it seems that the new chief of staff is much more conservative than Leon Panetta. Panetta was very effective, very strong figure in that position. His successor, Mr. Bowles, appears to be less liberal than Panetta, and
probably won't be working Congress with the same skill
won't be
as
able
Leon
to.
Panetta.
I mean, Panetta had more skill.
Well,
Panetta was there. He knew what he was doing.
Hard to find anybody like him.
So we're seeing a general drift to the right generally, and we may not have a very, very liberal cabinet pulling him back in that direction.
Unless Mitchell gets in and becomes a dominant figure, that could be the case.
And that could happen.
Because Mitchell was an extremely effective
absolutely
majority leader.
And in fact, conservatives are hoping that Trent Lott will be the George Mitchell for the Republican Party. In that light, I can guarantee you that in January there is going to be a ton of judicial nominations dropped. You know for a fact that a whole bunch of them simply didn't pass. It was amazing. I think Tom Jipping had more to do with it than we know. That all those judicial nominations that were left hanging with the 104th Congress just simply never got the voice vote confirmation that they always get. So there's a huge vacancy to fill. Shouldn't Republicans, if they're going to remain tough, start off by saying no judicial activists and get tough early in order to establish a precedent?
It looks like the momentum is with us now. The time is to get tough is now. And we've seen, I know that a lot of conservatives were uncertain about Bob Dole, and the one reason they said they'd vote for him is because they hoped he'd be able to make those judicial appointments. But then they said, look at how many of the Clinton nominations he confirmed over and over and over again. Why was there this sort of softness there and this willingness to pass people along and just rubber stamp them? Maybe there is a sense of energy now that we can begin to get tough on that.
Right.
I hope so, like that.
Now, Speaker Gingrich, of course, is coming across as much more mellow than 2 years ago, and I think he may have learned a few lessons over the last 2 years. Do you think that if the president tries this conciliatory, let's look for the middle ground approach, Gingrich would meet him halfway, or do you think Gingrich will hold out? And because he has a more conservative Republican caucus behind him now.
He certainly does. That's a tough one for me to call. You know, I think that Gingrich is a pit bull in some ways. He's programmed to go for whatever he can get, and I think if he senses softness in Clinton, he may well push. I don't think that he's, by nature, a sort of relaxed, generous person to give away stuff. So.
You know, the issue on that light that I'm worried about most is campaign reform. It sounds so wonderful for, in a bipartisan spirit, both houses of Congress to begin to talk about campaign reform, and yet all we have to show for the issue is McCain-Feingold, which I think is a completely unacceptable measure. It really does nothing for across-the-board campaign reform. Is that the only thing we're going to see in this Congress, and will that be ushered in a bipartisan spirit of let's solve campaign reform?
We're hearing an awful lot of brouhaha about campaign reform right now, but I think it's the same sort of thing as reforming the Electoral Congress. You hear a lot of noise about this, every 4 years, and it may well just peter out. I don't know. There seems to be sniping from Republicans and Democrats and vice versa going on about it, but it may not really be in anyone's best interest to actually create some reform there. So the whole issue may just kind of...
Now, the liberal Republicans, even though there are fewer of them than there were in the last Congress, Marge Rackham and Chris Shays and the rest of them, they've said we need to play a more dominant role because you really need us now because the Republican majority isn't as big. What role will they play? And on the other hand, what role will the Blue Dog Democrats play? And there are more of them.
Yes, and that's very encouraging. I think that perhaps I'm being optimistic, but I think the momentum is with conservatism over the next 4 years. Despite Clinton's reelection, there was a hollow quality to that. And the liberal Republicans, of course, are going to say, you're going to need us much more. But I'm not sure they're going to be all that vital.
Sure. They're the ones who lost the elections, after all.
Yeah,
the unexpected Republican
packing.
losses happen to be among these so-called moderate types. So both caucuses are more conservative than they were. Well, if you have a question for Frederica Mathewes-Green or a comment about the new spirit of bipartisanship between Republicans and Democrats, give us a call at 1-800-5000-NET. Fax us at 202-544-2405. Our number is 1-800-5000-NET. Fax us at 202-544-2405. Or send us an email at capwatch@fcref.org. Welcome back to Capitol Watch. Our guest is Frederica Mathewes-Green, and during the break, she told us about some new positions she's with. Frederica, you're a columnist now for Religious News Service.
Religion News Service,
and
that's
a reporter
right.
For
I'm a regular commentator on All Things Considered as well.
Radio. How about it?
So there's no excuse why anybody can't hear your comments.
That's true. I'm going to be infiltrating the airwaves. And
what about
all you have to
religion
do
and
is
politics? Is there a connection between the two?
No, never the twain shall meet, man.
The two topics you're not supposed to bring up at a cocktail party, I guess.
That's what Capitol Watch is all about, so you just blew that.
Well, let's see if you want to bring them up with some of our callers. Our first caller tonight is Tom in Columbia Crossroads, Pennsylvania.
Good evening to all of you. This new supposedly comity between the two parties, I think, is nauseating. Actually, they should just rename it the Republican Party, and we can go to Soviet-style government as they used to have. But really, people should look back into our history. Most of the history of our Congress has been rather raucous. I mean, if you think that the 104th Congress was raucous, boy, go back a little bit in history and read and see what some of these people did. But I do believe that the Republican Party is doing. I heard on the previous program that they're not saying anything right now. They're laying low. I think that's a good move because I see Mr. Clinton plays a very good defense. When he's on the defense, he is top notch. Okay, let him play offense and let's see what happens.
Okay, interesting strategy. What about it, Frederica?
I was thinking about the first thing you said, that the Republicans and Democrats almost seem to be merging in this love fest, and as you say, it's repulsive to you. A friend of mine says the slogan of the Republican Party is the same but slower.
It used to be the same but cheaper.
The same but cheaper.
Right, low-budget liberalism. But,
well, let's go back to the phones. John in Dallas, Texas, who I'm told will not be watching us, I guess, on Monday night. Is that right?
What, because of the Dallas Cowboys? No, I'm a Pittsburgh
You are a
Steelers fan.
Okay. Well, we've said that. Now tell us your comment or question.
Well, this new spirit of bipartisanship is a bunch of bunk. Every time we have this bipartisanship, it means that the American people suffer. They lose some of their freedoms. The Republicans should stick to their guns because the American people put them in there because there is a conservative movement in this country. And if the president has to raise his desk 6 inches on one side to sign the bills so that he doesn't feel like it's slanted, well, so be it.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. And what he's saying is, obviously, that the Republicans have a chance to remain conservative and stick to their guns. Where does gridlock fit in? Who cares?
Yeah. I think that one of the things we saw happening during the campaign was the nicifying of everything. Everything got dumbed down, everything got sweetened, everything got pasteurized. And partly this is moving the campaigns to television, and I'm afraid, I have to speak as a woman, I think it's aiming at a female audience. Women don't like to see people fight. They want to see everybody hugging and being nice to each other.
you know, that's an interesting point you raised, Frederica. I noticed during the campaign that a new type of attack ad had to be created, where you attacked somebody in a very nice way, and the audience hardly noticed that you were the one who was holding the knife, but they know that the knife went in. The real attack ads were the ones that accused the Republicans of being mean-spirited and divisive and all those things. We don't want any mean-spiritedness here, and it was said with such saccharine tones.
If I were a candidate
for that.
being accused, I would think, well, since I'm being accused anyway, I might as well live up to my accusation and really go after the... They never talked about, for example, a real key issue that I think would have polarized the electorate and helped give Republicans a victory if Republicans had talked more about the partial birth abortion ban.
Wasn't it surprising that they didn't? And I was not privy to the polling that must have showed them it wasn't a good thing to talk about. But it certainly...
All you need to know is who was doing the polling.
The polling shows, in fact, now that the public was waiting for someone to talk about those key issues, and finding none in the presidential race among the major candidates. They went ahead and just voted by default, or either that or simply didn't vote, and we know a lot of them didn't vote.
Well, of course, the real reason for that was Linda Duval was Bob Dole's pollster, and she was driving. She had an agenda of her own, and she wanted to give him
pro-abortion.
But anyway, let's go on to another caller. Let's talk to Gus in Bend, Oregon. Gus, I was in Bend one time. It's a great town.
It's a great
Thanks for
Silent View restaurant, a 36-ounce hamburger. Yep.
All right.
Got to go over there.
We've had so much wonderful bipartisanship is the whole reason I voted for Ross Perot. We've bipartisanshiped ourselves when Clinton started from a $4 trillion debt to a $5 trillion debt, and not one single person mentioned, I don't care what they say about the deficit, we cut it in half. How did it go up $1 trillion in 4 years if he did such a wonderful job, and not one single person mentioned it? Thank you.
Yeah.
National debt.
Yeah, that's a good question. How does Clinton, basically, we're getting back to the question of how does Clinton get to be the Teflon president? Nothing ever sticks to him. And I'm afraid it is because we've got a McDonaldized kind of political discourse here, where
Well, it
if you're
would help.
affable, you win. That's all you got to be.
You're going to be a Teflon president, but it would help if the other side would throw a little spaghetti at the Teflon.
Yeah. And I think that perhaps Bob Dole was... That's a good one. Bob Dole was already suffering under the handicap, so to speak, of being accused of being a mean person. He's got that one eyebrow kind of goes up, and he looks sarcastic, and he's got that little edge to him, and they must have been saying, be nice, smile. He would remember to, smile every once in a while. And as a result, he didn't do the attacking that he should have done. Now, he's on David Letterman. He's going to be on Saturday Night Live tomorrow night. He's becoming this person that's a genuine person that perhaps would have been more likable.
He's relaxed now, yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Woody, in Carson City, Nevada, welcome to Capitol Watch.
Thanks again, Brad. Nice tie again, too.
Thank you.
Bob Dole, I think, was beaten because he was bipartisan. That was what I had against him. He was always compromising, and every thing I got from the Republican committee to pick a candidate in the primary, I put next to Dole. If he runs, I vote third party, and they nominated him anyway. But one of the things that really convinced me I was right in this and shouldn't vote for him, both of my Nevada senators from a right-to-work state both voted against the right-to-work bill in Congress, and both of them said Bob Dole is reasonable. Well, that was the nail in the coffin. If the press or Democrats think they're reasonable, forget it. You don't want any part of them. They are the enemy. They're not opponents. They are the enemy. Thank you.
A reasonable group of politicians out there. Is that why we elect them?
Well, nothing ever moves if everyone is reasonable, don't you think?
Well,
You need a
sometimes
little
too
bit
much
of...
moves.
Well,
One of the things the president seems to be steering the Congress towards is to get them to agree to move the Medicare issue to a commission instead of having Congress or the president actually come up with a plan to fix it. They'll just defer it and let somebody else do it, and the result will be a big tax increase.
put it on the back burner and sneak it in the back door. And that sounds like a typical kind of Clinton tactic, doesn't it?
Well,
We shall certainly see.
Sounds very familiar,
I
doesn't
suppose
it?
we should brace ourselves
Yeah.
for something like that. Our guest is Frederica Mathewes-Green. If you have a question or a comment about the new spirit of bipartisanship in Washington, give us a call at 1-800-5000-NET, fax us at 202-544-2405, or send us an email. You're watching Capitol Watch on NET, the political news talk network. Welcome back to Capitol Watch. Grab some milk and grab some toast, because we're talking about the new spirit of bipartisanship. And so far, many of you viewers are saying, yuck, we liked it the old way. We want a little controversy because that's what we're electing our officials to do. Is it bipartisanship that got us into this mess in the first place over the past year or two?
Sort of got us so bogged down.
Yeah.
And one of the things I was thinking was that the ability to bring sides together and kind of negotiate was what Bob Dole was known for 30 years in the
Yes,
Senate.
that's
And
true.
Why did we pin our hopes on him as this valiant, going to ride in on a white horse like a knight and change things, be a revolutionary, advance the revolution, when he'd always been a peacemaker? In fact, when I interviewed him about a year ago, I asked him, what would you hope to accomplish as president at the end of your 4 years? What would you like to look back and see that you'd been able to do? And what he said was, I'd like to see that I was able to bring people together and we could talk to each other and, you know, we could work out decisions. And I thought, well, that's a method. It's not a goal.
Yeah. And you know,
So,
on Saturday
know?
Night Live, he'll have a chance to do that very soon. So,
in other words, the people voted against bipartisanship. That's
you know, they really did.
Yeah,
Let's
they
be
did.
honest here.
You bet
Let's
they did.
go back
You know,
right.
talk
In the House and
talk
the
to
Senate.
John Sweeney about bipartisanship.
Let's go back to our...
I mean, he wants a little bit of that now because, hey, the
Oh,
assassination
yeah. Oh,
attempt
yeah.
failed.
Oh, sure.
The gun just said pop.
Yeah, let's hand them out, all the bipartisanship slips. Chris in Plainfield, Indiana, are you feeling bipartisan tonight?
Absolutely not, Fred. I agree with you wholeheartedly.
Good.
Listen, if there's anything I've learned about watching the Democrats, when they say bipartisanship, what they really mean is you abandon your principles and do what we want to do.
Here, here.
What I'm trying to say is that, you know, as far as the Republicans are concerned, they seem to think that there is a fundamental difference in philosophy between Republicans and Democrats. And if that's really true, if they really believe that, then partisanship is the name of the game. And if they think that Bill Clinton is really conciliatory and he wants to work together, they haven't learned a thing in 4 years. I'd like to hear your comments if you have any.
That's good, Chris. In fact, I wanted to ask you a question. You talked about the call to bipartisanship as a call to abandon our principles. What would you say are some principles? Could you just enunciate or name some things you think we should absolutely not compromise on? What would be some examples of that?
Oh, he's
you
gone.
there?
He's
Yeah,
not
gone,
there.
Chris? You're gone. You left.
But he's
me.
thinking about it.
But he's thinking about it.
Save that question.
That's a good question. For
Save
someone
that
else,
question,
then.
Frederica, for Mike, because he's a first-time caller. Never called NET before. He's from Mount Dora, Florida. Mike, thanks for calling.
Gentlemen and
You
ladies,
get to ask yours, and then Frederica
this
can
is
ask one of you.
more than interesting conversation that we have going on here. I think, number one, that you have to get right down to the basics, identify the enemy per se. Our president, as far as I'm concerned, Democrat, communist, to me, the two names are synonymous. And I'm not kidding. Unfortunately, it's just a situation that's the way I feel. And as far as our Congress is concerned, bipartisanship should go the way of the carrier pigeon. It should be non-existent. We sent them there to do a job. Unfortunately, they turned tail and ran at the end of the last term. I hope, surely to goodness, that we have not wasted our votes again.
So I could paraphrase that and say bipartisanship should go the way of the kangaroo rat, which, by the way, is a delicacy in some corners
Snail
of the world.
darter. There you
Well,
go.
yes, well,
Do you agree?
The reference, of course, is the kangaroo rat is an endangered species, and as a consequence of some weed that the kangaroo rat eats, a lot of people in California couldn't live in houses. They weren't allowed to build houses in this place.
But you know, rat burgers are really more popular in California now than they ever have been.
Even than eagle burgers.
Yeah.
Gonna be in trouble.
Yummy.
Oh my!
You remember of People for Eating Tasty Animals? Is that the PETA?
So let's
You know,
try that. That sounds I like the idea
Oh,
of
this
that.
is getting
yeah,
deep.
yeah.
Okay, back to the phones. Charles in Apopka, Florida, a first-time caller. Welcome to Capitol Watch.
Thank you very much. Hello?
Hi.
Yes, we're with you, Charles.
Yes, my remark was that if the Republicans don't nail the swine bag in the White House to the cross right now, okay, as a veteran, I am so teed off of this man who says that there's peace in Bosnia. There isn't any. He's sending more troops over, okay? Everything that comes out of his mouth is a lie. And
I
if the
trust that
Republicans
means you didn't
do
vote for
not
him.
nail him to the cross, we'll be stuck with him for 4 years and his vice president for the next 8 years.
Charles, does that mean you did not vote for Clinton? Is that what you're saying?
Honey, if I could have voted 7 times for Dole, I would have.
If you lived in Chicago, that could have been your privilege.
There is so much virulent feeling against Clinton. Every caller we've had tonight has been saying no bipartisanship, hold the line, get out there, punch him in the nose, nail him to this cross.
And
Is what
really,
this
we
guy's
should
saying.
say Mr. Swinebag to you viewers. You know, let's get it.
No, really. That's what the public
is
voted
the
for, though, Frederica.
That's the
They
thing.
ratified the
They really
Republican takeover of Congress. They made both houses of Congress more conservative than they were before.
They did. Indeed.
And they rejected the conciliatory bipartisan presidential candidate, Bob Dole.
Which
and they
means
elected
the result of 1994 is not a fluke, as the media
been
has
ratified.
been
Well, that's
saying.
true.
It
It's
has been
continuing. In
ratified.
fact,
Well,
it's advancing. Yeah.
Okay, let's go to John in New Haven and find out what he has to say. John, tell us how it is.
Well, I'll tell you how it is, Mike. I think this bipartisanship should just kind of evaporate over the weekend because every time there's a spirit of bipartisanship with this president and these Democratic congressional leaders, the Republicans lose. They get snookered and then they get attacked. And what they do is they provide a smokescreen of language, conservative language, for Clinton to hide behind. That's how he got to be president again. So what I'd like to say is also what principles we shouldn't abandon: lower taxes, smaller government. Don't abandon the life issue, whether it's unborn life or the elderly or the handicapped. Protect all life. Don't abandon the Second Amendment, and don't abandon reform. I mean, when the people were elected in '94, they saw a very corrupt, fat Democratic Congress, and they swept them all out. And so if they have real reform in government, and stick to those few principles, I think they'll go a long way to retaining the Congress and doing some good for us as well.
That's pretty good for core principles, Frederica. What do you think of that?
I think that's very good.
The agenda fits on one hand. And,
yes, it does. You can put it on an index card in case you forget. You know, you can carry it and refer to it. And I think the question of partial birth abortion is probably one that's worth bringing up again. If we can bring that up again in this Congress, perhaps that is something that we could have bipartisanship on, ironically, because we did see Democrats who are willing to vote on our side for this. And we saw the president saying, I have to have this amendment that will, basically make them all legal again, and that is common ground. He was calling that common ground. People saw through that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, an awful lot of Democrats voted to override that veto at great risk to themselves.
That's true. See, I'm not opposed to Democrats voting the right way. If that's what bipartisanship means, then I'll be in favor of it.
Oh, well, that definition, fine. We'll go along with that, right?
Right, of course.
All right. Frederica Mathewes-Green is our guest. If you have a question or comment for her about the new spirit of bipartisanship in Washington, call us at 1-800-5000-NET. Fax us at 202-544-2405 or email us at capwatch@fcref.org. This is Capital Watch on NET, the Political News Talk Network.